Hi, everyone. Welcome to another VITA Academy webinar. Today we're going to have Mr. Peter Peasy. Peter, I hope all is well with you. I know you're getting everything together right now. And
yeah, I'm here and I'm getting organized, but yes, all is good. How are you doing?
No problem at all. Just take your time. I'm doing great, you know, and it's another day. We're gonna learn some more education from you, which is always a good thing for all of us technicians that think we know everything, but we really don't. So I appreciate you spending time and out of your busy day and doing this with us and educating the rest of the technicians in the world. I greatly appreciate it. Peter, I'm going to make you the presenter and let you run with it.
Sounds good. Well, thank you. So as usual, I think I always mention for people who paid attention before and watched these that Jim kind of picks the topics most of the time, and he gets them from things I've said or emails you send about something you'd like to hear, and they're always kind of fun and challenging for me. This one threw me for a little more of a loop than usual. And if you want honesty, Jim, part of the reason I was a few minutes late was because I was still sitting at my bench polishing a few of these crowns that I was trying to give some examples on and making some videos on and trying to get them together last minute, because, you know, as all technicians, we do everything last minute. So I think the challenge here to teach this or to discuss it in a way that's fair for everybody is to first have a little bit of an understanding of it. One of the challenges I think we see today, especially with monolithic type restorations and the, I'm going to call it the single molar dentistry, is we've lost a lot of what I would call surface topography and maybe even some artistry in some of the areas. If you look at the teeth on the screen in front of you right now, just look at the detail that are in those teeth. Now, I know if you're not used to seeing it, or you're not seeing good photography, or you're not seeing good models, maybe you're not seeing it that way all the time. And in truth, in order for us to really understand what to do, we have to learn what we see. And I would argue that a lot of times we don't see that. Now, I'll just tell you that, interesting enough, I've done a million courses around the world over the last few years. And what's interesting to me is whenever I'm in a course, somebody always says to me, oh, could you make a crown for this doctor? He or she is very difficult. And let's see what happens if you make it for them. And my answer is always, if I make it for them, they are going to send it back to you and tell you they don't like it. And the technicians usually say, well, what I don't understand is that yours supposed to be nicer or better. And that's all debatable. But realistically, why they're not going to like it is because they haven't seen it that way for a long time. I think one of the flaws that we face from a technician world is we start getting into our habits. And I know I do it too, because I can tell you, I go back and look at things and find that, well, I used to do this a little bit differently, and I kind of got lazy over the years, and I don't do it the same anymore. So why would that doctor return it to the lab if I did it? Many reasons. One, I'm going to incorporate surface topography, and I would argue that a lot of us aren't doing that, especially on posterior teeth. I might have different graduations of colors. I might have a different surface that I've glazed and polished the crown at. And that's another part that we're going to go through as we go through our time together. So first, let's start with the basics here, surface topography. Surface topography refers to both the profile and the shape of the tooth that we're talking about and the surface roughness. And this really kind of varies on tooth to tooth, and it's very different. You might find some teeth that are completely smooth and have zero surface topography and very low luster to them, which we'll also discuss, where other teeth have much more aggressive surface topographies and very high shine kind of or luster to them. Your job is to kind of define those things and really know what you're looking at. So for me, surface texture isn't just about making little ridges and lines and dots and things and dents in the teeth. It's really about the light reflection. It's really about how we could take the surface of the tooth that we're looking at and not only create a surface that looks natural to the tooth next to it, but also reflects light similar to the tooth next to it. Also, the most challenging in world part of this is in the single central, right? When you're trying to really match that single central, it's the little details that you're going to find make it match better than anything. And it's not always about the color and the hue and the value. It's really about the light reflection and surface topography. Also, if you notice the picture in the middle, that's a piece of glass looking outside, and half the glass is frosted. So it's the same glass. The only difference is what happens to the light. Well, the light that goes on the top half of the glass goes right through and sees the object. The light on the bottom half of the glass reflects the light from the surface. It absorbs some and reflects some. So I know people kind of always think that smoother and shinier is really the way it works, but in truth, it's surface topography that actually adds some value or could possibly lower the value depending on how you utilize the reflective ability of the surface that you're working in. So let's take a case. I think I've showed this case before over the years. It's a great case. I won't walk you through all the details of it, but I think most of you know I start with face, white, and pink, facial pictures, dental, facial, and dental, kind of the standard. And I'm looking at this patient. He presented because he hated his number 9 or his 2-1. He wanted us to change that. And when we looked through the tooth, for me, I felt like the spacing was a little bit awkward. I actually thought that maybe we should have done not both teeth, but maybe we should have done a window veneer or something on the number 8 to kind of give it a little bit more width. But he had no interest in that. We also wanted to raise the gingival tissue a little bit, and we could do that either with the crown lengthening, just a slight tissue augmentation, or maybe even just raising the emergence profile on the restoration to push the tissue up. It really depends on the bone level. So when I first got the case on my hand, I actually had wax stick to add a little bit of a window veneer to the distal, and like I said, the patient was completely against it. He just wanted that 1 tooth replaced, so that really wasn't an option. All the photographs were taken. We do that pre-anesthesia, is always kind of the standard process. And I think I've gone through this before, so I'm kind of running through it a little bit faster. I think you guys already know this from most of the lectures that I've done, whether it's personal webinars or you can go back and watch a lot of them, I'm sure, especially when it came into photography. So we've done all our basic photography. I'm looking at value and value confirmation. Sometimes I could do that in the black and white just to kind of keep it simple. And again, all that is done way before the anesthesia because that dehydrates the tooth. And then for single essentials, we almost always take a polarized photograph, and that's by a friend of mine in Greece who kind of put that system together for us. And what that polarized does is it really allows us to get a better, flatter look of the tooth. It actually takes away the surface topography, but it allows you to see a little more depth inside the tooth, which helps me to work through the coloration of what I'm going to build in my ceramic materials if I'm going to build it, or if it's monolithic, it's the same process for me. So all the shades are taking, again, standard shades, prep guide, everything pre-anesthesia, and then when the provisional is done, then we'll take a final shade of the final photograph of the provisional. Now, I don't like that provisional. It's not really a great representation where we want to go. That's going to add a little bit more challenge to me to make the tooth work properly. I built the tooth, and just so you know, it was a micro-layered zirconia crown, so I just layered facially. In the end, the patient went from here to here, and I hope when you look at that tooth, you should notice that there are some flaws with it. For one, I could tell you that when I saw the photo, my first comment to the doctor was, "Oh, great, send that back to me. I can fix it up. It'll take me a little time, and one day, and I'll have it back to you. It'll be perfect." And the doctor said, "Oh, I actually cemented it. The patient loved it, and he lives far away." And I'm like, damn, I just wanted one more little chance at that because it's so obvious to me what's wrong with it. So let's take a look at it from a different perspective. Here it is under polarized. And you'll notice under the polarized, if you look at the cervical, the middle third, and that incisal third, it's pretty close, right? Polarized wise, I mean, there's a few little flaws, but in general, I have the values and the areas that I want to have more translucency. They're all pretty close to what it should be. So it wasn't the buildup that was really the problem. The contour is pretty good. And I'd say if I look at the contour under the same polarized, I had to try to make it look a little wider to fill the space. But in general, okay, it's pretty close. And I don't think 8 and 9 are always exactly the same. They should be, in the same family, but not exactly the same. So I'm accepting of the contour, and I'm accepting of the coloration that I put into this so far. Where's the failure then? The failure for me is really on the surface. Look at the surface of the tooth next to it. Look at all the little details of the highlights of the light, especially around that cervical third. And I'll be honest with you and tell you, I did put all that in there. I worked really hard to get that surface texture almost exactly the way it was. But also I remember specifically as a last minute technician that I was polishing the case quick to send it out with the messenger who was on his way to pick it up. And I think I over polished it. I think I took away a little too much of the surface typography that I had put on. So in my mind, that's really a failure. That was the one thing that would have really made this a complete home run that none of us would have caught. Hopefully that it was even a crown at all. Just that little detail and that little area of ridges and typography that are on there. Otherwise, look at the light reflections. They're all pretty good. The value's not too bad. Maybe it's a hair high, but in general, it's all pretty good. The one missing thing is really the surface typography. So when you're in that world, those are the areas that you really have to be really critical with. And I'll tell you that it's funny for me because what really makes the teeth flow together is the surface typography of how they tie in from one tooth to another. So as I'm looking at teeth, whether they're natural teeth or fake teeth, I'm looking at them to see how they blend and how they harmonize. And sometimes some teeth might have slightly more textures than others, some might have slightly less than others, but in general, it all kind of harmonizes. So this is an interesting case because, God, I did this case, I'm showing a bunch of old cases today. I did this case probably 15 years ago, and I remember doing it with a doctor that I had never worked with before. He called me up and asked me to do a single central for him. And my policy at the time was I don't do them, like charge twice for them because I'm going to do them twice. But after I got a look at the photograph, I actually said, you know, this doesn't make any sense because you want me to match a tooth that's not really a real tooth. It's a bad veneer that someone else made, that tooth on the number 8. And I thought to myself, you know, this is kind of silly. I'm never going to hit that tooth to make it look like that. And the doctor said to me, well, I don't understand. I'm paying you more. You're supposed to be good at this. I said, well, I'm maybe not that good. I said, but in truth, I don't know what that is. I don't know what the restoration is. Was it a monolithic crown? Was it a layered crown? Was it layered with 1 powder or 30 powders? Was it cemented with white cement or transparent cement? Is the staining that you see in there, is that on the tooth or is it in the tooth? You see, if it's nature, I kind of have an idea because I study nature. If it's someone else's crown, I don't even know where to start. It's much more difficult because we don't have all the information. So my suggestion to the doctor was pop off that ugly veneer and let me make 2, which he inevitably did. So he took the other veneer off, he cleaned up the preps on both, he re-impressioned both teeth instead of 1, and I sent him back 2 teeth instead of 1. And in the end, that allowed me to kind of control what I saw in the adjacent teeth next to it. So on insertion, you can see the pillar starts to come down and they start to harmonize and blend in with the rest of the teeth. And really what makes them harmonize? Are the colors exactly the same? No, they're close. But really what makes them look similar or blend in is because the surface typography that is similar to the adjacent tooth and the light reflections that is similar to the adjacent tooth. And that's all about surface at the end. So let's kind of dive into the surface part of this. And by the way, almost every case I do, I'm thinking the same way. I said I put a lot of old cases in here. This is a case I did probably 15 years ago with a great friend of mine up in Westchester, Lynn Clover, a great guy. I just was looking through some old lectures and I saw this one and I thought, okay, young kid, he needs a little bit of surface typography, but not too much. And we went through our normal protocol back in the day, which was, you know, stick bite. Today we use a baseball and, or place analyzer, I should say. But in the end, we're incorporating all the things that we do today, maybe just an earlier evolution of what we've graduated to. And I remember Dr. Lenny was so amazing in how he really managed every little detail. He would mark out the teeth and would use 3 different indexes to make sure he was providing the right space for everything, and so diligent in how he worked through that process. And it was really a great learning curve for me, and I was lucky to get to work with him because I learned so much. And as we finish this case, we provisionalize, and you can see the provisionals don't really have any surface to them. They're kind of one material, and maybe I could have did a better job in the wax up. If I even did the wax up, I don't remember if I did it or somebody else did it, but not important. And when I got to final restorations, I really was trying to learn to spend my time to understand what the surface typography should be. where should be the heights of contour that the light reflects from, where should be the little dots and ridges that the light either gets absorbed or reflects from. And I would test myself with these gold powders and these little gold dusts to kind of see. And what I learned as time went on was I wanted to incorporate that surface topography into the tube, but I also wanted to incorporate more than I needed. Because in the end, when I was done and I would glaze and polish the tube, I would lose some of the surface topography. We'll cover that more as we get to the end of this. So I would actually always increase the surface topography and then polish it down as I got more to the end. Doctor inserted the restorations, and I would argue, for me, I think this was a youthful version of what surface topography should look like. It was 15 years ago. And, I hope I'm way better at it today, but I remember as I was going through the process to try to learn how to make it work and how to make it look right in each patient's mouth. And over the years, that's changed for me. I've learned to work on different details. I've learned to work on how much texture I need or how little I really need, depending on the look that I'm looking for that patient. I've also learned to understand how to create the surface topography and then polish some of that surface topography out, like you see in the crown right here, where I'm actually over creating it and then polishing some of it away during my final process. So I think for me, when I talk about surface topography, this article stands out in my mind. It was written by a friend of mine, Aki Yoshida. I think it was back in 2010 or 12, if I'm not mistaken. It was in QDT. And Aki's focus back then, who, by the way, I think is probably one of the best in the world when it comes to surface topography, was to kind of break it down for people. So rather than me reinvent it, I kind of just stole it from him and how I teach it, because I think he did a great job and how he explained it. I'm going to kind of steal some of the photographs that he took for that. So first, I want you to look at these two pictures on the screen. And if you look at the crowns on the left of your screen, or the teeth on the left of your screen compared to the teeth on the right of your screen, I would always ask people, which teeth would you rather make? If you had to match a single central on the right of the screen or a single central on the left of the screen, which one would you want? And I'm hoping that most of you, if you really understand surface topography and what it can do, that you'd be picking to the right of the screen. Why? That one's a lot easier. The one on the left of the screen, a nightmare. Very difficult for you to create that softness and luster, get that very smooth kind of finish, and kind of make it match and blend in and harmonize with the light reflection because of the lack of surface topography on it. The one on the right, it's easy. You can put lots of little ridges and lines and grooves. They don't have to be exactly the same. They just have to be similar. And you'll see that they'll blend much better in the oral environment. So for me, the way to really look at this is to start looking at surface topography on the teeth. And as you understand it, you're going to understand that, again, if you had to choose one of these cases, choose the one on your left this time, because that one is much easier. Do you think the surface topography on those two teeth are exactly the same? I mean, really look at them. Look at the 8, look at the 9, or the 1-1 and the 2-1. Look at how much different the topography is. Yet, look at how the light has a very similar reflective index to it in the areas that it's hitting. You see the same thing on the other side. Look at the 8 and 9 on the right of your screen. And again, the light reflections are kind of similar. Maybe they're drifting a little bit more towards the mesial on that number 9. But that surface, very difficult. So I would much rather stick to the surface areas where I can actually create topography. And the way Aki broke it down, which I thought was really smart, was he broke it into a few sections. First, when we're looking at the surface, let's look at the ridges and the grooves, the convexities and the concavities. What are the high points of the restoration and what are the low points of the restoration? Because that is all part of your surface. That's where the light gets absorbed and reflected from. The second part was the horizontal ridges and grooves. This also could be known as pericomata, but we'll kind of define that a little bit more as we go in. Realistically, these little secondary grooves are what you see that kind of float through the teeth. And a lot of these are formed during development of the tooth as the tooth is actually evolving. out of the arch. And then those little pits and irregularities, you'll see those on different teeth. And sometimes those are just a matter of managing your burr, tapping, and kind of roughing going across to find those little ins and outs, and those little pits and irregularities, sorry. And then the last part of that is what we call the pericommata. And those are those little kind of lines that flow all the way through the tooth from the incisal edge down to the surface. Not all teeth have that very pronounced. Then again, not all teeth have pits and irregularities very pronounced. It really depends on the tooth that you're trying to match. I will tell you though that youthful teeth almost always have more surface typography to them, and older teeth usually have a much smoother, flatter surface. So when you're talking to your patients and educating them about what they need to do to make their teeth look healthy and young, one of the things you don't want is flat, smooth surfaces, because those look like older, worn teeth. And the words I use are that, you know, Miss Jones, when you're young, the teeth have a lot of surface to them and they reflect light. As you age, you've polished and worn those teeth down and you've created a much smoother surface, which is a sign of an aged tooth. So when you present it to them that way, it really makes them understand. The other thing that I thought was a great part of this article back in the QDT, I think again it was 2010 if I'm not mistaken, a long time ago. The other thing that I think he did so well, and again, I haven't reinvented it. Why? Because this is correct. So there's no reason for me to create my own version and act like I invented it. I'm taking it right from here and I've used it ever since. What he also did, which I thought was very smart, was he talked about 3 different options. So one, when we talk about texture, you could say there is a lot of texture, maybe a little texture or a moderate texture, or low texture. So those would be the 3 main categories: high, moderate, and low. When we talk about glaze and how we glaze and polish a crown, same thing applies. You can have a very high luster, which is a very shiny looking tooth. You can have a very medium luster, which means it doesn't have that extra shine to it. Or you could have a very low luster where it almost looks like the teeth aren't glazed and aren't polished. And I'll be honest with you, the high luster is kind of the one I stay away from the most. I really tend to work in the lower and medium lusters most of the time, and I'll address that as we go through. But what this chart does, which I thought was kind of nice, was 1A, 1B, 1C, was a way to say, okay, I could have high texture and high luster, high texture and medium luster, a high texture and low luster. So it kind of gives you a little chart to kind of work from. Same with moderate texture, high, medium, low luster, and low texture, high, medium, and low luster. So it's kind of a way to kind of break that down. And some of my doctors use that today when they're actually communicating with me, which actually makes it nice. Now, when I start to work on the actual texture, the part of the challenge for me is being able to see it. And I think the stone model still gives us the most detail. I mean, this is an old model that I did in a course years ago, and look at the detail that you see on that model. And if I have to match that central, I want you to notice all the little lines and the ridges and the pits and irregularities and all the things that we just talked about, how they're there. Part of the challenge we're facing, and I know it's a digital world and I'm going to sound old here, but part of the challenge we're facing is this: you're not seeing that on the digital cast. You do not have the ability to actually capture all of the surface. And it's not because the cameras and the scanners aren't capturing it, they can. It's producing it either in a milled model or a printed model. They're better. They're getting better and better and better. But I can tell you, for me in my lab, don't send a single central on a digital model. I'm not doing it. Why? I'm not good enough to figure out what's there. I need the information on the cast. So this is a digital impression and a standard impression. Take a look at those two. And if you were working, if you had to make a single central on the lower tooth here, how difficult would it be to match what you see on that digital model and make it much more challenging? I even took a few pictures of just some digital models that were here in the lab, and we've been working with a few different printers. So we have 3 different printers, and we even send some models out every now and then. Look at the surface that you'll notice and the repetitiveness of the digital model. If you notice, especially on the case all the way to the left or all the way to the right, you notice there's almost the same pattern in the print on the tooth. That's not the human's pattern. That's the pattern the printer gives you. So that really becomes problematic for us. And part of what we have to do is really be able to see the typography on the tooth. So again, If you're doing single centrals or 2 units or 4 units in the anterior, you really want a solid and accurate poured model. And I just want to be clear in how I say this. If the impression is not good, and if your stone pour is not good, of course you're going to lose some of that surface typography. But it's a guarantee you're going to lose it in the digital model. So just know the parameters, and also the photography can really help you here, because a lot of times I'll look at my pictures and I'll look at the model and I'm like, wow, I don't see any of that typography, either because the pour was bad or the digital scan was bad. Most of the time it's a digital scan though, because we have a pretty accurate system on our model work and how we get the accuracy that we want. So now I'm going to start with the surface of what I see here. And if I'm doing this on normal ceramic, and I'm saying normal ceramic kind of in parentheses, right, because Jim's title was really monolithic materials, which I'm going to get to in a minute. In normal ceramic worlds, I have a lot easier surface to actually work from. So I'm just basically going to look at my heights of contour. I'm going to look at my ridges and grooves, my convexities and concavities, and all the little details. And I'm going to take a few different burrs that I use. I predominantly use the same 3 or 4 burrs. I think today I've added maybe 2 or 3 different ones. I might use that little reverse flame. It kind of looks like a backwards pear sometimes. Or I might use a flatter tip diamond just to get a little more angle and ridges in there. But in the end, I'm kind of moving, utilizing just these same 3 or 4 burrs over and over again. And I actually made a kit years ago that I was, one of the companies was selling, the American Recovery was selling. Now I'm using mostly Comat materials. I have some new ones that I'm testing now, but it's not important. Whatever ones you're comfortable with, just know the ones and what they can do. And what I mean by what they can do is, the best example is something like this. If I take a greenstone, and I'm using the edge, the flat edge, that 90-degree angle on the greenstone, and I treat it at that angle. Look at kind of the L-shaped mark it'll make to the all the way to the left of your screen. If I change the angle of the burr, and I'm still using that 90-degree angle, I'm now creating more of a V-shaped mark inside the restoration. And if I change the angle more, I'm going to kind of create almost a reverse, or maybe like a C-shaped-ish kind of a shape in there. So I have to be very aware of the instruments that I'm using and the angulations and how I use them to create the proper textures. Now, what's interesting about this photo that I took years ago, again at a course, you're going to notice that stone models don't normally reflect light, but I'm getting a good amount of light reflection on this model because the tube is so thin. Notice how the dots of light you see on the stone model, you see similar dots of light on the crown, the restoration. And that's how I know I have the typography pretty close. That's where I'm going to get those little details from. So one of the things that I've done, and I might have to stand up this manual if I just finished some of it, is I wanted you to see the difference in what we're doing. And this might make me sound a little bit negative on some of the monolithic things. I do monolithic things too. I just have to approach them a little bit differently. So let's start with this one here. And you're going to notice that, I want to start with that one first. Let me stop this one. Start here. So if I'm working on a ceramic crown or a regular restoration, watch my burr as it touches the crown. And you'll notice how the dust kind of pops up. You can see that I'm actually making some indents inside the surface. And that's kind of the way it works normally, whether it's micro-layered or fully layered. When I look at another type of material like the zirconia, oh, this is the wrong video. So actually this is still ceramic, I'm sorry. And you'll notice that I'm kind of, look at the dust that's kind of coming off it as I'm going through. You can actually see the dust actually coming off the restoration. So those are the 2 burrs that I probably use a lot, that little reverse flame and that little pointy diamond that'll give me those little edges that I want. So if you look at the picture on your left, I want you to notice I'm popping that burr into my thumb to show you how slow the revolutions are. And if I'm going to work on zirconia in the green state, I want to really run that burr very, very slowly in how I do it. I want to use a duller burr, and I want to use something much slower. And by the way, this is in green state, because that's where I'm going to get the best surface typography. Now, the other thing that I'll do with green state zirconia is I won't use burrs. I might use a spatula. Sometimes I'll even use a a blade, a sharp blade or a spatula to help do some of the carving and some of the typography actually on the green state zirconia. And this really allows me to get a better surface, because it's really difficult to control that in the final state of the zirconia. I actually had a video, I must have deleted it by accident, where the video showed me grinding on a ceramic crown and grinding on a pure monolithic zirconia crown. And I think you already know the difference, right? It's not easier to do it on zirconia. So if you're going to work in the zirconia, work on it in the green state. So you'll notice here that I've actually did all the contour and texture on these during the green state. And by the way, for you, Jim, these are the newer zirconias that VITA is distributing right now. I've been starting to kind of test them and play with them. And this was one of the examples or samples that I've used. So I think this is just, if I'm not mistaken, a more affordable material. I predominantly use the normal ST, but I've been playing with this a little bit just to get a feel for it. And this was a test sample that I made. So notice the surface typography here that you see, and that was all done with a blade and a waxing tool, right? No handpiece, nothing else. I'm just doing a little carving that way. And you can start to see, if you look at it, that I'm getting kind of a little bit better of a surface rather than if I'm trying hard to hit it with a handpiece. When I hit it with that handpiece, I feel like it's really difficult to control. I did the same thing with these two crowns. These are the ST. This is also the multi-layered material, by the way. So you'll see it when I glaze it up, that it has a nice little look to it. But on the monolithic multi-layered material, all the little fissures, all the little irregularities and pits that you see in there, I did all with a blade, a sharp blade, or with a waxing spatula that had a certain tip to it that I like. And you can vary that for the ones that you like and how you feel comfortable. And then very quickly, I kind of just threw some stains on these. I didn't do a very good staining job. I was doing this at 10:30 this morning, right, getting ready for this. So this is that newer zirconia that VITA is distributing, and it was kind of a whiter material. I tried to warm it up and give it a little color, just one coat of stain in the glaze. But what did I want you to see? I wanted you to see the surface. Look at the surface typography that exists in there. And I would argue that looks pretty natural for zirconia, right? It doesn't have that rough, rigid area that you usually see when you're trying to grind on it. And the same thing here. This is the ST multi-layer. And again, a sloppy, quick stain job, but you guys get the concept. I wasn't trying to do anything fancy. I just threw a little on and glazed it pretty much at the same time. I wanted to make you see that I can get that surface texture out of monolithic materials. I just have to think differently about how I do it. Now, one of the things that's interesting with some of these stain materials, I don't want to run past my time, was we had done a webinar a few webinars ago. I don't remember which one it was, but it was again one of Jim's topics, the zirconia black hole. And when I did that lecture, I focused a lot on fluorescent materials. And I think for most of you who know, I'm a big fan of fluorescent materials, whether it was old school PFM or even with zirconias today. When I'm micro layering, I'm still doing ceramic margin on most of them because that's where I'm getting some fluorescence inside the tooth. And if I'm doing a micro layer, so if I'm just doing, a monolithic monolithic zirconia, and the back is all zirconia, and I'm just micro layering the front, I'm still starting with a margin and some fluorescent materials on it. That's standard for me. So as much as I like those fluorescent materials, I don't like them so much in the end. I like those fluorescents to be inside. And this goes back to the chart of the type of luster that you want to create. So what I did here, and this was actually a while ago, I had made these, I just found these old slides, but I took some poorly surfaced restorations. They were monolithic. And what I did with them was I put some glaze paste on one half of the tooth and no glaze paste on the other half of the tooth. And you'll notice the surfaces are really rough, right? So to the left of your screen, I just dug in and made some lines. I wasn't trying to be fancy. I was trying to make a point. And the point I'm trying to make is if you look at it before I put the glaze paste on and you look at it after I put the glaze paste on, notice what starts to happen. You start to lose the surface that you put there with the glaze paste. So if I actually cover it with glaze paste, which is what most of all of us are doing, you start to actually lose some of the topography. And by the way, I made those ridges really deep and ugly on purpose. I wanted you to see those two big lines that ran across the teeth. But I also wanted you to see what happens when I cover them over with that paste and how much that I've lost. So imagine if you spend 10, 15 minutes on your surface topography, trying to get all these little details and ridges and dots and irregularities. And after you do this, you've lost it all. So there's a problem for me with a lot of these pastes. They are highly fluorescent and they're also very shiny. And shiny sounds good. And I know your doctors are used to seeing shiny, but I'm going to tell you teeth are not shiny. Teeth have luster, high, medium, or low, depending on the age of the tooth and the habits of the patient. And that has to do with their biology and the saliva and everything that's going on in their mouth is what really creates the surface that we see. So I'm going to take some of these materials and I'm going to break them down for you a little bit differently. So what you're going to notice is first off, let me go backwards one. Let me tell you that I do use the glaze paste. So I'm not trying to tell you I don't use it. I don't use it straight though anymore. What I kind of do is I'll take a little bit of my glaze paste and I take something that I used to use years ago, actually probably even before I worked with VITA, I was using this finishing agent. And I always loved it for when I was glazing restoration for several reasons. One, it's a very, very fine material and really fine. You'll notice when you start to put it down and actually some of the powder kind of floats off your slab as you're putting it down. And I used to use it when we were first working with lower fusing ceramics. And I used to find that the ceramics were getting a little pitty and we couldn't really get that smooth surface on it. And I would come back and take a little bit of this finishing agent and I would actually just use some water and a flat brush and kind of paste it right over my restoration. And I would get those little fills and those little kind of pits and things that I didn't want in the restoration. But because it's so fine, I wouldn't get them in the details that I put in. Today, I'm kind of mixing the two more. So what I'm doing is I'm taking some of the finishing agent and I'm taking some of my fluorescent paste. And you'll notice those are the two of them next to each other in the middle. You'll notice that the paste is highly fluorescent and the finishing agent is kind of low in fluorescence. There is some fluorescence in it, but not much. So I'm going to kind of choke the fluorescence down a little bit more. And as I mix them up, I can make several different mixes. Actually, what I did for this example was I made one mix of pure, which is kind of what you see all the way to the left of your screen. And then I made another mix of just the finishing agent, and then another third mix of the finishing agent and the glaze paste. So let me explain it better so you know what's on your screen. The one all the way to your left is the pure glaze paste, highly fluorescent. The one right next to it with the powder and the paste, that's a mix of the finishing agent and the paste. And then the one on top of that is the pure finishing agent. You're going to notice that that really has very little fluorescence that you can see in the fluorescent light. So I kind of did that on purpose just for you to understand the difference of it. And when I'm working on a tooth, whatever material it is, it doesn't matter to me. I really want to think through what my surface topography is going to be and what surface I'm trying to do. And the reason that I made these three mixes is for what I'm telling you are, there are some times that I might just use the pure glaze paste. I get it. It's a pure monolithic brown, not a lot of texture, and doctors like shiny. Use it. It works well. For me personally, it doesn't sit well with me, so I'm almost always going to go the second version. And in other cases where you have much lower luster, sometimes you're better off with just some glaze liquid and the finishing agent. You'll get a much nicer surface at the end that would be easier to polish. All right, so let me stand up again because I have to run these videos by hand. So one of the things I've done after I've glazed it is I'm going to come back with a rubber wheel. And I'm going to very lightly kind of break through the surface with my rubber wheel. And if you notice, I'm kind of using the edges of the rubber wheel because I'm kind of just trying to get that surface of the edge of the rubber wheel to kind of break through that. And then I'm going to polish out the restorations just with a diamond paste and an avid brush. So I spend time on the surface topography I spent a little time on how I'm actually glazing through the restoration. I have to be honest, I don't even like the word glaze anymore. I think it's an old school word. It's really about luster, right? Creating the right luster on the restoration. And then lastly, breaking down the surface and polishing it up a little bit. I'll just leave you with the case that I used to show years ago. I haven't showed this case in so long, but this is Sarah. Sarah's slightly famous, I guess, very nice young girl. And Sarah presented to actually have 20 teeth done, and we didn't want to do 20 teeth, so I won't walk you through the whole story because it's a long, involved story. And I used to show this case a lot over the years. I haven't showed it in years now, but I found it for when I was looking for some surface texture things. Long story short, we talked Sarah into not doing 20 teeth. Her teeth were very nice, and we actually convinced her to move some of the teeth around. And because we moved them, we were able to actually only have to do 2 restorations, which was kind of a better way to do it. But the key to those 2 restorations was what? Surface topography. And I spent a lot of time trying to make sure that I understood all the little nuances and the ins and outs of the teeth that she had. And it was those little nuances that really make it kind of flow and work in her mouth. And in the end, we didn't have to wind up restoring, 20 teeth on an 18, 19-year-old. So it works much better for us to do that. And that's really all about surface. So I hope I explained it well. Maybe there's some questions. It's always a challenge with some of the topics Jim throws at me, and I kind of like challenge. So I'm always wondering if I always hit the point that I needed to hit. But I'll stop here, and it'll hopefully leave us a little time. Oh yeah, 10-2, perfect. It'll leave us a little time for some questions. I'm sure we'll have some questions.
You can visit us also at the help desk whenever you need. And then there's a bunch of other webinars and programs going on. I'm working with Peter right now to work out some dates for maybe a remote workshop, some in-house workshop as well at maybe Peter at your facility sometime in the fall, which would be really great to do. But as you can see, we have a lot of webinars, a lot of programs going on that I hope you can join us with. And then just so that you're aware, we also have next year's VITA Germany courses. The dates are set. So 2024, if you're interested to spend a week in Germany at the VITA factory and then move on to, taste some beer. I'm not sure if how well the beer is in Europe, but, I hear it's pretty good. But, if you're interested in beer, or sometimes they do wine tasting as well, go ahead and get a hold of your rep, your sales rep, and ask about this, or you can contact us here at the Education Center. And then Peter's going to also be November 10th, 11th. Peter's going to participate in the SCAD, the ProSec SCAD meeting in Chicago. This is a open forum conference that you're more than welcome to come. We're trying to get as many laboratory technicians and dentists involved. Peter's going to be one of the keynote speakers. He's going to tag team it with Dr. Miles Cohen. It's going to be a great presentation. So please join us there. And then, of course, Peter, he had it before, but Peter's gracious enough to give us his information. If you need to get a hold of Peter, here is his phone number. Here is his email address. I think you should text him or email him first. He is quite busy. It's hard for me to even sometimes get a hold of him. So leave him a message, give him some time to get back to you if you have something that you need to ask. Now, questions. Those of you who have questions, go ahead and send them through. And otherwise, I will go ahead and start what I have. So the question is can you please share what material you have used on the cases you're showing us? So I think you kind of did. Some were zirconia, some were probably VITA blocks, or, I'll let you speak for yourself. But that was the first question. Type of material.
Materials. I actually, one of them was a Mark II veneer that I was playing with just to show the surface and the softness of the material, how it ground. And then the others were just zirconia. It was I used the ST zirconia most of the time. And I was experimenting with some of the newer zirconias that we're coming out with.
And then one part that you showed the polishing. after you glazed. Do you use pumice or recommend? Do you ever use pumice or a buff wheel, a buff material?
Yeah. So when you're creating surface luster the right way, I'll be honest and tell you there was probably nothing better than pumice polishing. Rag wheel, pumice polish. I used to mix in, a little bit of a stovetop cleaner to get the right grits, and had all different mixes over the years. I don't pumice as much as I used to, mostly out of laziness, but also out of evolution. And what I mean by that is there are so many different polishes on the market today, diamond polishes, and some of them are really high grit and some are low grit. And you actually have the ability to kind of do almost the same thing that you did with pumice. I think pumice is probably the best, but it's also the most challenging in the sense of, you wipe out a crown, a little too much pressure. It's a lot more control, a lot less control. So for me, I'm kind of avid brush, sometimes a little tiny rag wheel, and mostly rubber wheels and then diamond polishes.
And the polishing, one of the questions further down was on your rubber wheels, is that a diamond impregnated rubber wheel, or is it just plain
I'm using
silicone?
I'm just using it's funny, I use two kind of rubber wheels. I use sometimes an old school metal rubber wheel. It was like those blue rubber wheels that we used to use to polish metal. I'll sometimes use them for something very soft. And then I use those pink ceramic rubber wheels that I don't know if it's brass or who's making them, to be honest with you. But they're basically just pink rubber wheels. They're kind of soft. And I really just use those to kind of roughen or break my surface, to kind of break the polish of the glazed paste that's on it.
All right. I know you had answered it, but one of the earlier questions was the type of diamonds you use. Is anything further you want to talk about the diamonds? I assume was it fine grit, medium grit?
Yeah, I think look, I mean, I use mostly some of the chromat. I've been kind of working with a few different companies right now and kind of playing with their diamonds. Look, I don't want to say that diamonds are diamonds. I think some companies maybe make them a little bit better, and a lot of that has to do with how they heat sinter the diamond onto the burr itself, and that process makes it work better for you. But I would also say this: diamonds are throwaway materials for me. In other words, if I use that little pointy diamond that I showed you, and I'm putting my little anatomy in there, and I get that diamond for one or two cases at the end, because by the time I'm done with it, I've lost all the diamond edge on it. So realistically, what I would tell you is, don't treat diamonds like they're supposed to last forever, especially those little micro diamonds where you're using them just for surface typography.
All right. And then in previous webinars we've seen, and today we've seen the gold powder and the silver powder for texture. Do you have a preference? Does it matter?
I don't, but I'm going to answer that. But I'm going to go back 1 second. I just wanted to say one other thing about the diamond things. That it's funny to me, because the other thing you have to be kind of aware of is, if you're working on ceramic and you fired it right, your diamonds will last much, much longer, right? If you're working on zirconia or lithium disilicate, your diamonds are going to be done on 1 or 2 crowns, because the material is so hard. So rather than killing the diamonds, I think you're better off utilizing a hand technique like I was trying to show you today, with the scraping and all those things. And then back to your gold dust. You know what? I don't know gold or silver. I think I like the way the gold photographs better, but in the end, I think whatever one you're comfortable with, it doesn't really matter. You're really just using it just to kind of check your surface at the end. I don't do it as much as I used to be honest with you, but I'll photograph it every once in a while in a case, just because I think it looks good to show the typography on the screen.
All right. And then speaking of the green state of zirconia, question is, do you, before you start adding the texture in the green state, do you not polish, but smooth out all and get rid of all the milling grooves? Or do you leave those milling grooves in there? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I'll go with a fine diamond at the very end and kind of go through my contours and shape. And by the way, I'll even draw on the green state like I would. I'll take a pencil up and down, and I'll mark my line angles, and I'll try to contour and cater. I'll try to do a little bit more in the green state, especially on bridges these days. I feel like the last thing I want to do on a bridge is start going in there with discs and things. That's where they start breaking on you. So trying to do more and more in the green states. I'm also micro layering a lot, so I'm probably doing less monolithic than some of you. I'm pretty much micro layering on a good amount of my cases, but if it is doing monolithic, I just did a monolithic bridge anterior, and you know, I spent a lot of time in the green state, shaping, contouring, texturing, doing all that stuff, then centering, staining glaze.
All right. And then I assume this question is about monolithic, but not sure. But have you ever experienced the restorations get gray after a couple of months in the mouth? Is it because of the breaking the glaze seal by mechanical polish? So, Nasser, you know, if you want to elaborate maybe on that question, but it might be monolithic, maybe zirconia. I'm not sure what material you're using.
I'm going to make the assumption that they're talking about lithium disilicate and not zirconia, because lithium disilicate will definitely give you that feel. A lot of times in your hand, it looks a lot better. And then when you put it into oral a week, 2 weeks later, you start to see that grayish low value hue to it. So I'm going to assume they're talking about lithium disilicate. If it's happening with zirconia, I'd be really surprised. And what I would suggest, if you see it happening in zirconia, you might want to check the cleanliness of your furnace, meaning you decontaminate your furnaces and make sure that the furnaces are pure, because sometimes with the glazing pastes, they don't burn out as well, especially at lower temperatures. And you can get a little gray residue that kind of gets created inside the furnaces and can do that. So I don't know that's the issue with what they're saying, but that could be an issue to be aware of.
All right. All right, to kind of wrap it up, this last question, you talked about the surface reflection when you photograph, or to I think you were talking about the tooth, and that you'd like to see when you took a photograph, or the light that shines against the tooth is scattered all the way around and not just in one area. Is that correct?
Yeah, so what you're looking for is, it's the difference. I've gone through this in many photography courses and many lectures. I always not talk about it. When you're taking pictures for color and typography, you need your flashes coming from a 45-degree angle. The minute the flashes are too much to the center, then it just kind of whites out the tooth and you lose the ability to see. Then once I have the angulation coming in right, what I'm really trying to do is make sure the reflective indexes of where the light is reflecting from the tooth is similar on the adjacent tooth. So I want the centrals to reflect similar. I want the laterals to reflect similar, the cuspids to reflect similar. And the way I'll usually test that is when I have the case pretty close to done, I'll take a picture of it, I'll look at it on my screen, and I'll see if I'm getting those reflections, and then I'll come back and final contour.
All right. Well, Peter, again, thank you very much for helping us out today doing the webinar. Any last thoughts or comments you want to make in this topic, or any other topic?
I really appreciate you. You know, it's funny, you know me, I'm always like overwhelmed with 9,000 things to do. And I saw the email 2 days ago about the webinar. I'm like, what topic did he pick? I don't have any material for that. I kind of started trying to run through a million different things. And like I said, up until about 2 minutes to 12, I was sitting at my bench polishing crowns and taking pictures and trying to squeeze enough information in there to make it worthwhile for everybody. So it's always fun. I was a little behind schedule this week. It's been a long week, but no, I'm happy to talk about anything that's interesting. And I like the challenge because it kind of forces me to do things that I might not always teach if I don't have somebody say, what about that?
Well, thanks again. I think you hit all the high spots on this topic. So I appreciate you getting everything together and presenting today. Like always, I hope everyone enjoyed today's webinar. Look for additional webinars by Peter in the future. We've got several more to go, different topics. And then also visit us on the VITA North America YouTube channel to visit some of Peter's previous webinars as well. And with that, I will say thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Peter, for joining us. And we will conclude today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.